Hello and welcome to the Chatterbox Letters podcast. I am going to be reading my very large like letter to my listeners. That'll be my chatter like letter. This book, aka Chatter Letter, is called Holes. I hope you will enjoy as I read Holes in audio format. I will be reading chapter by chapter, so it seems interesting as you are curious to know the whole story at its entirety. Introducing Holes by Louis Shachar. I'm going to be reading chapter 5 to everyone. So let me go ahead and get started with chapter 5. Let me look for it. Make sure. Okay. Turn right to it. Okay. Here we go. There were 6 large gray tents, and each one had a black letter on it. A, B, C, D, E, or F. The first 5 tents were for the campers. The counselor slept in F. Stanley was assigned to D tent. Mr. Podansky was his counselor. My name is easy to remember, said Mr. Podansky as he shook hands with Stanley just outside the tent. 3 easy words: pen, dance, key. Mr. Sir returned to the office. Mr. Pendanski was younger than Mr. Sir and not nearly as scary looking. The top of his head was shaved so close it was almost bald. But his face was covered in a thick curly black beard, with his nose was badly sunburned. Mr. Sir isn't really so bad, said Mr. Podansky. He just been in a bad mood ever since he quit smoking. The person you've got to worry about is the warden. There's really only one rule at Camp Green Lake. Don't upset the warden. Stanley nodded as if he understood. I want you to know, Stanley, that I respect you, Mr. Podansky said. I understand you've made some bad mistakes in your life. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. But everyone makes mistakes. You may have done some bad things, but that doesn't mean you're a bad kid. Stanley nodded. It seemed pointless to try and tell his counselor that he was innocent. He figured that everyone probably said that. He didn't want Mr. Podansky to think he had a bad attitude. I'm going to help you turn your life around, said the counselor. But you're going to have to help too. I can't count on your help, which means he can count on his help. Yes, sir, Stanley said. Mr. Podansky said, good, and patted Stanley on the back. 2 boys, each carrying a shovel, were coming across the compound. Mr. Podansky called to them, Rex, Allen, I want you to come say hello to Stanley. He's the newest member of our team. The boys glanced wearily at Stanley. They were dripping with sweat and their faces were so dirty that it took Stanley a moment to notice that one kid was white and the other was black. "What happened to Barfbag?" asked the black kid. "Louis is still in the hospital," said Mr. Podansky. "He won't be returning." He told the boys to come and shake Stanley's hand and introduce themselves like gentlemen. "Hi," the white kid grunted. "That's Alan," said Mr. Podansky. Okay, next page. "My name, not Alan," the boy said. "It's Squid, and that's X Rex." "Hey," said X Rex. He smiled and shook Stanley's hand. He wore glasses, but they were so dirty that Stanley wondered how he could see out of them. Mr. Podansky told Alan to go to the Ree Hall and bring the other boys to meet Stanley. Then he led them inside the tent. There were 7 cuts or cots, each one less than 2 feet from one next to it. "Which was Louis' cot?" Mr. Podansky asked. "Barfbag slept here," said X-Ray, kicking at one of the beds. "All right, Stanley, that's yours," said Mr. Podansky. Excuse me a little bit. Stanley looked at the cot and nodded. He wasn't particularly thrilled about sleeping in the same cot that had been used by somebody named Barfbag. 7 crates were stacked in 2 piles at one side of the tent. The opened end of the crates faced outward. Stanley put his backpack, changed clothes, and towel in the used to be Barfbag's crate. It was at the bottom of the stack that he had 3 in it. Squid returned with 4 other boys. The first 3 were introduced by Mr. Podansky as Jose, Theodore, and Ricky. They called themselves Magnet, Armpit, and Zigzag. "They all have nicknames," explained Mr. Podansky. "However, I prefer to use the names their parents gave them, the names that society will recognize them by when they return and become useful and hardworking members of the society." "It ain't just a nickname," X-Ray told Mr. Podansky. He tapped the rim of his glasses. "I can see inside you. Mom, you've got a big, fat heart." The last boy either didn't have a real name or else he didn't have a nickname. Both Mr. Podansky and X-Ray called him Zero. "You know why his name Zero?" asked Mr. Podansky. "Because there's nothing inside his head." He smiled and playfully shook Zero's shoulder. Zero said nothing. "And that's Mom," a voice said. Mr. Podansky smiled at him. "If it makes you feel better to call me Mom, Theodore, go ahead and call me Mom. He turned to Stanley. If you have questions, Theodore will help. You got that, Theodore? I'm depending on you. Theodore spit a thin line of saliva between his teeth, causing some of the other boys to complain about the need to keep their homes sanitary. You were all new here once, said Mr. Podansky, and you all know what it feels like. I'm counting on every one of you to help Stanley. Stanley looked around the ground. Mr. Podansky left the tent, and soon the other boys began to file out as well, taking their towels and a change of clothes with them. Stanley was relieved to be left alone, but he was so thirsty he felt as if he would die if he didn't get something to drink soon. Hey, uh, Theodore, he said, going after him. Do you know where I can fill my canteen? Okay, next page. Theodore whirled and grabbed Stanley by his collar. My name, not Theodore, he said. It's Armpit. He threw Stanley to the ground. Stanley stared up at him, terrified. There's a water spigot on the wall of the shower stall. Thanks, Armpit, said Stanley. As he watched the boy turn and walk away, he couldn't for the life of him figure out why anyone want to be called Armpit. In a way, it made him feel a little better about having to sleep in a cot that had been used by somebody named Barfbag. Maybe it was a term of respect. Right now, it's still kind of odd that he's still Stanley trying to find some water to put in his canteen. But what I see is now the starting of the story, excuse me, is starting to get a little bit better, to read. But that is the story about holes. All right, I'm going to say right now, like, share, subscribe to my podcast. Hit that notification button to know once I go live. Ring that bell for updates on my podcast. If you have a chatter letter that you would like to have broadcast on my podcast, please send your chatter letter to Post Office Box 5556, Lakeland, Florida 33807. Please do not hesitate to send me your letter. All right, but once you write your letter, please keep it clean. Your words, and I mean your words, clear and discreet. And again, please send me your chatter letters. Don't hesitate to do that. I want everybody to procrastinate and send their chatter letter today.